What is up, ladies and gents? It's your boy Jermaine Event, Main on MMA, and today we are checking out a video from the YouTube channel MixedMollyWhoppery. Yes, we're checking out another video from the YouTube channel MixedMollyWhoppery, and this video is titled McGregor's Appeal. All right, let's look into Conor McGregor's appeal. This title of the video, let me continue, is McGregor's Appeal, What the Jury Never Saw, ladies and gentlemen. So maybe there is a little more to this case than what met the eye, ladies and gents. So let's dive on to this video and I'll give you guys my reactions afterwards. But as always, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and let's get into it.
In the last video on this subject, I asked people to let me know if I had missed any important facts or details. And it turns out
there isn't, he did a deep dive on this. I didn't watch that. Maybe we'll go back and watch that one after this.
I did. I think I missed what could be critical details on both sides of the case. So I've got one major thing that could be relevant to McGregor, and then I want to clarify some timelines that I think could be relevant to Nikita's case. I'll start with McGregor. Now, I missed this whole thing. A friend of mine had to point it out to me. So as you might know, after the case, McGregor wasn't happy, and specifically, he mentioned that the jury did not hear all the evidence that the DPP reviewed. Now, in that video, I gave some reasons why the DPP, the prosecutors, had decided not to pursue the case. But the DPP mentioned one thing that I left out, and that was relevant witness statements from hotel staff and a taxi driver. So is it possible one of these statements is what Conor feels was left out of the case? Well, we can almost say for sure that it is, because there was a dramatic exchange between Nikita Hand's barrister and Conor McGregor during McGregor's cross-examination. Here's a clip from an Irish crime podcast.
And as well, I suppose then we had the incident where he was being cross-examined by Nikita Hand's team, and he jumped out of his chair. So he was being asked about his phone, and he sort of jumped out of his chair and threw his phone at, here you can have a pal, at her legal counsel.
Now, I've read a couple quotes and exchanges from the trial, and honestly, Conor didn't do himself any favors. Like, it's not a UFC press conference.
Yeah, that's crazy.
If you're standing up and tossing your phone at the opposing lawyer or whatever it was, you're showing the jury that you're impulsive, you're unpredictable, and you're not taking the thing seriously. You're kind of presenting yourself as someone the jury might enjoy taking down a peg or two.
That's crazy.
This is the important part of that exchange.
And then, of course, when he was shouting, the vitriol over at Nikita Hand about the evidence he wanted, I want all this evidence in the court, he did sort of,
And was he looking at her?
Over, and point over at her.
McGregor said he wanted the jury to have all the facts. He wanted everything out there, including a statement from a taxi driver, in which McGregor alleges the taxi driver saw Nikita performing oral sex on someone in the back of the car. Now, it's actually not clear who McGregor is referring to here, but we know she left in a taxi with James Lawrence. So it seems McGregor was alleging that a taxi driver made a statement that he witnessed Hand performing oral sex on Lawrence, and for some reason, the jury weren't allowed to consider that as part of the case. Now, this might sound like I'm giving Conor's words too much credibility in the heat of a volatile exchange where he could have been trying to manipulate the jury. But remember, this is not just coming from Conor. We know from the DPP that there is a taxi driver. He did make a statement. That statement was viewed by the DPP as relevant, but for some reason, it wasn't presented to the jury. So it is something. What are the implications? Some people might think this is a sign that McGregor did not have a fair trial, but it's hard to say why the judge did not allow that as part of the case. I'm assuming it was the judge who blocked it. If McGregor was the lone defendant in the case, maybe you could argue that it was irrelevant or prejudicial, but James was a co-defendant and being accused of non-consensual sex, so a witness stating that he viewed them in a consensual act would seem extremely relevant to his defense. It would also clearly strengthen McGregor's case. McGregor's defense fell apart, in part because the jury did not find James Lawrence credible. You know, a lot of people feel the jury found in favor of James Lawrence because they believed him over Nikita, but that's not actually what happened. There's a really strange dynamic here. The only reason James was a co-defendant in the case was because after Nikita accused McGregor of sexual assault, James came forward and made a statement claiming to have also had sex with Nikita. Nikita says she had no recollection of that. And so her reaction was, okay, if he wants to say we had sex, fine, but it wasn't consensual.
What?
And that's how James became a co-defendant. So you had this very strange situation.
That's crazy.
Where she had a case against James Lawrence for sexual assault, but she maintained throughout the case that she felt it was nonsense, that it never happened. It was just a made-up story as part of McGregor's defense.
That's crazy.
And the jury ultimately believed her version over James, that they never had sex. And that explains how James was found not liable, but also why his testimony wasn't very helpful to McGregor.
Yeah.
They didn't believe him. And just to be clear, I'm not speculating about the jury here. This is according to the judge. The reason the judge did not make Nikita pay James legal fees was because, as I've said, he felt the jury had not found in James' favor because they believed his story. They found in his favor because they believed Nikita's story. So the jury felt James' whole story had been cooked up to defend Conor McGregor and ruin Nikita's image in the court. And that's why the taxi driver would seem to be significant. Like, it would be much harder for the jury to believe they never had sex if you had a taxi driver saying he saw her performing oral sex on James. So if it was credible, and if it was as McGregor described, which are both big ifs, it's difficult to imagine why it wouldn't have been allowed into the case. Now, this might sound like I'm making a massive argument for Conor, but actually, I would be reluctant to interpret it in that manner. And here's why. Here's the thing a lot of people don't understand about the Irish judicial system. Irish judges, they call them druids, and they're kind of a mysterious group. They're kind of like Irish shamans. They have rituals and they write poetry, and they drink little potions that allow them to communicate with entities from other dimensions. And that's how they make their decisions. No. Despite the funny costumes and the hilarious wigs, Ireland is a modern country with a respected judicial system that comes with all the standards and practices you'd expect. So this judge isn't just a law unto himself, with no oversight. He has to be able to justify his decisions within the context of Irish law. He can't just decide he wants to omit certain facts because he doesn't like McGregor's face. And I'm sure this is the last case he'd ever pull some ridiculous stunt, for multiple reasons. First of all, McGregor has the resources and representation to hold the judge accountable with respect to the legal standards that have to be met. If the judge cut corners or did not meet whatever legal standards are in place, Conor's team would bend him over their knee and legally spank the fuck out of his ass. But it's not just the resources Conor has, it's also the scale of the spectacle. This is, I'd have to imagine, the most high-profile case the judge will have in his entire career. So like if Conor makes an appeal and the appeal has success on the basis of shady or unfair decisions made by the judge, that would be a huge black mark on his career. You know, they'd have to overturn the result or do a whole new trial because of this guy's incompetence. It'd be an embarrassment for the judge. And for that reason, I'd feel reasonably confident that the judge can defend his decision in a legal context. So, I'd be reluctant to read too much into it. There is something that doesn't quite make sense here. If the taxi driver was referring to James Lawrence, surely James would have mentioned this as part of his own defense. So it's very strange. I can't work it out. Maybe the taxi driver was referring to himself and not James Lawrence. But I mean, there's all sorts of problems with that too. So it's hard to understand the whole thing. But we'll see. I think we will find out just how relevant it is. If you read between the lines, this will probably be a big part of Conor's appeal. You know, you can't just appeal the decision because you don't like it. This is not Nate Diaz. I feel like I was inefficient with my testimony, so let's go again. He needs a solid reason for an appeal, and this is what he's mentioned being unhappy about. He doesn't feel the jury saw all the evidence, and he specifically mentioned the taxi driver. So the judge's decision to block that is likely to be scrutinized as part of McGregor's appeal process. So we'll see how the whole appeal plays out. The other thing I want to discuss is that a lot of people have come down on McGregor's side on the trial, and they cannot understand how a jury could possibly side with a woman whose story is so full of holes. Now, no matter where you've landed on things, we have to be honest about the reliability of Nikita Hand. A lot of people make a big deal out of her lying to her boyfriend, and maybe that does speak to her character in a way that is relevant. But the bigger issue for me is not the lies. It's that when she was trying to give an honest account of the truth, when she was trying to tell the truth, it seems she just couldn't do it. And this was not only a matter of minor discrepancies, like where she was when she sent certain messages. Those details aren't that important. This was bigger things, like she completely invented and imagined extremely stressful and dramatic scenarios that verifiably did not happen. And I'll give you one example. The first person Nikita spoke to about the events of that day was her manager, Emer Brennan. She spoke to Emer shortly after James Lawrence left her in the taxi. So she didn't go home. She went to Emer's house. And Nikita told her that she had kind of escaped from the hotel. She had been worried that McGregor's security were going to assault her. And so she ran from the hotel car park and got into a taxi. And that's how she got away. Very action movie-esque. As we know, she left the hotel in a calm manner in a taxi with James Lawrence. There was no dramatic escape like she described to Emer. And I wouldn't doubt that she believed her story at the time. So just being honest here, she was in a very bad state and simply not interpreting reality in a reasonable manner. She gave multiple different accounts of the events to different people. Her manager got one version, the boyfriend got another version, and the police got another one. And we also know she forgot very significant portions of the day. So she was forgetting things, she was inventing things, she was mixing stories up, and she was lying. That's not a character assassination from me. Those things are verifiably true. So I think people are just shocked. How could the jury have possibly...
Yeah, I didn't understand it. I didn't talk too much about this case, but when I heard a little bit of it and she was like, couldn't really answer questions when they were like picking apart her story, I was like, oh yeah, Conor's going to win this because she couldn't answer simple questions about the things she said happened. But anyway.
Possibly found against McGregor. And a lot of people are saying this suggests bias or a conspiracy against McGregor. So I want to take a shot at how the jury might have arrived at their decision, because it's very likely that in a civil case with a low burden of proof, instead of looking at every detail and every inconsistency, they could have distilled this whole case down to a couple of relevant questions and then simply answered those questions with what they felt was most likely. Now, I know that sounds nuts, but that's the nature of a civil case.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So the first thing I want to discuss here is the extent of her injuries. I see a lot of people suggesting various explanations of the bruises. The most common explanations appear to be the following: an accident or a fall. McGregor said she swan dived into the bathtub, so like she could have banged into something, or even a series of accidents. Another possibility would be rough sex. And of course, we have the whole reason for the trial, the possibility that the injuries were the result of an assault. I'm sure there's other theories, but those are the main ones. Now, 2 medical examiners agreed that the injuries were compatible with Nikita's story. But let's take a look at the injuries, and you can kind of get a sense yourself. For me, a fall or a series of accidents doesn't seem to make sense, but listen for yourself. An abrasion on the right side of her jaw, which had been bleeding, a purple bruise on the right side of her neck, that looked like a love bite. On her right arm, 3 purple bruises consistent with fingertip bruising, a bruise midway down her forearm, and 2 separate purple bruises on her lower arm. Purple bruising on the knuckles of her right hand that was tender on examination. Now, the purple bruising on her knuckles will be important later in the video, so just make a mental note of that. On her left arm, a purple bruise on her upper arm, 2 separate bruises on the elbow joint, an abrasion on the elbow with 3 separate linear abrasions below this, and 4 separate bruises on her lower arm, a purple bruise on her right shoulder, a purple bruise on the right side of her upper back. That's already a lot.
Yeah, she got
But listen
roughed
to
up.
these ones. Extensive bruising on her buttocks, with 3 separate bruises consistent with a handprint on her left buttock, a purple bruise on her right breast, and a 9-centimeter scratch on her left breast. 2 separate purple bruises on the left flank of her abdomen. 4 separate purple bruises on the front of her right thigh. 2 separate purple bruises on her right kneecap, and bruising on her left thigh. 4 of her acrylic nails were missing. So, I'm not an expert, but reading that, you can certainly understand why the medical examiners felt all this was the result of a sexual assault. It certainly doesn't sound like she fell in a bathtub, and the potential fingertip bruising and handprint suggests that it wasn't.
Yeah.
But so what? That doesn't in itself prove McGregor was responsible for those injuries. And that's what they had to try to figure out. When did those injuries likely occur? Is it possible she had the bruises before meeting McGregor? Now, I'm not going to go into all the reasons I think that's unlikely. There's multiple reasons. But I think the biggest one is that McGregor admits having sex with her, and he didn't mention those marks. If she already had some bruising and cuts, that would be his entire defense. I didn't do that. She already had them. When presented with the images of the bruises in court, McGregor said he was shocked. And at another point, he specifically said there was no scrape. And obviously, bruises take time to appear. But it wasn't just bruises. It was bruises and cuts and abrasions and scratches and missing fingernails. He would have noticed something, and surely that would constitute his entire defense. She already had the injuries. So it doesn't seem likely that she had them. Now, the phrase "doesn't seem likely" might seem extremely loose when discussing a crime, but you have to always remember we are dealing in terms of probabilities in this case, not in terms of certainties. The question then becomes, in what window did the bruising occur? What is the first verifiable mention of the bruising? A lot of people think it's the recording with her boyfriend, but actually, as I said, Nikita Hand did not go home after James Lawrence left her in the taxi. She went to her manager, Emer Brennan's house. And Emer Brennan is one of the people who testified in the case. Now, according to Emer Brennan, Nikita named McGregor as her attacker. She said Nikita appeared to be shook, and critically, Emer says she saw the bruises at this point. She even claims she took photos of Nikita's bruises, but later deleted the photos when the story broke.
Why?
Because both women were concerned by the media attention. After visiting Emer Brennan, Nikita went home, and that's when the boyfriend made the 38-minute recording. Some people think the boyfriend might have inflicted the injuries, but it's worth noting a couple things. They were discussing the injuries in the recording. The boyfriend was being sympathetic, like he wasn't angry. He was even saying he would take a day off work the next day to take her for a medical exam, and he was saying he wants her to report the crime. He was pushing her to report it. Like in the recording, she's begging the boyfriend not to get the police involved, and he matter-of-factly states this is not being kept a secret. But anyway, in the recording, she mentions that her body was sore, which could allude to the bruises. And she mentions that she had been choked 3 times. The paramedic later mentioned bruising on her neck. She also tells her boyfriend to look at her knuckles, from fighting back. As I mentioned earlier, when talking about her injuries, she did have bruised knuckles. So I think a reasonable interpretation of that conversation.
Oh, did Conor have injuries? She got bruised knuckles and all this. It seems like a fucking war was going on in there. Like, I'm not saying she could knock Conor out, but like he should have some kind of, her knuckles are bruised, purple, and tender, they were saying.
Would be that it seems to be the earliest solid verification of the injuries and of the allegation of sexual assault. And that was approximately 3.5 hours after she left James Lawrence. Just to conclude the sequence of events, for anyone who's interested, what happened next was that Nikita didn't want to go to the police. Her boyfriend went to work the next day, and she went to her mother's. Her mother saw the injuries and called the paramedics, and that's how the case began. But anyway, if the jury believed Emer Brennan, then that would mean they believed she had the injuries very shortly after saying goodbye to James Lawrence in the taxi. That would be very bad news for McGregor's case. If people are skeptical of Emer Brennan because she deleted the photos, the injuries seem to be verifiably discussed in the audio recording with her boyfriend, and that was about 3.5 hours after leaving James Lawrence. So there is some wiggle room there. But with these timelines in mind, the jury might have distilled the whole case down to the following 2 questions. Did the injuries likely appear to be the result of an assault? Like, could they have been the result of an accident or rough sex? Or did they look more likely to be the result of an assault? If the jury felt the answer to that question was yes, then the next question would be, we don't know who did it. But in the 10 to 14 hours when they seem to occur, who was more likely to have inflicted those injuries? Conor McGregor or somebody else? That is the very low bar the jury were trying to satisfy on the balance of probabilities. This is not beyond a reasonable doubt. This is more like gun to your head. Was it Conor or was it someone else? And the jury felt it was more likely Conor than anyone else. So that's how I think they might have arrived at their decision, despite the massive issues with her story. One thing I want to be clear about here is that it might sound like I'm coming down on one side or the other, like I'm advocating or trying to change your minds. In the first half of this video, you might have felt that by mentioning the taxi driver, I was kind of advocating for McGregor or suggesting he didn't get a fair trial. And in the second half, clearly people could feel that I was making a case for Nikita Hand. But I'm not actually trying to push either case. And the reason I can't do that is because I'm not in a position to evaluate the credibility of the various bits of evidence or information I've discussed in this video. I don't know what the taxi driver actually said. I don't know how reliable his story was or why it wasn't allowed in the case. I don't know how credible Emer Brennan appeared to be. I didn't hear the boyfriend's recording or see the bruising. So I'm not making the case in either direction. All I'm trying to do in this video is suggesting that if someone, like the jury, was in a position to evaluate the credibility of these pieces of evidence, these are the conclusions they might come to. But I am certainly not coming to these conclusions myself. There's a reason that they have a long, thorough trial, and it's so a group of people can take a comprehensive look at the evidence in order to evaluate its credibility, so that they can make an informed decision. I certainly don't think I'm doing that here. I'm only speculating about how those things may have been interpreted. That's all I can do.
Solid work from MixedMollyWhoppery. That was a pretty interesting take on the case and what the jury might not have seen, in Conor McGregor's appeal. I do want to definitely check out his video on the whole case. He has an unbiased look on the McGregor case. But it's a pretty touchy subject, It's a civil case where, as I try to repeat to everybody who talks about this, like, civilly liable doesn't mean you're convicted of a crime. You don't even have to prove that anything necessarily happened. You just have to have a good argument to win a civil case. So, yeah, it's crazy, man. I don't know if the taxi driver and all that stuff to me sounds like enough where, pardon the crying baby in the background. Well, baby Elijah's never been here before. But anyway, I don't know if the things that I heard in that video there would be enough to win an appeal for Conor McGregor. As far as like civil is concerned, because as I'm saying with civil, you don't have to prove anything happened. You just have to have a good argument. So I thought that was a pretty dope video from MixedMollyWhoppery. We're definitely going to check out the bullet points of the case next. Probably I did it backwards, but it is how it is. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think that what he presented in that video is a strong enough evidence for Conor McGregor to win an appeal, or do you think he should just give it up? It's civil. It's civil. You don't have to prove it. You just have to have a good argument. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys for being here once again. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, and I will see you when I see you. I'll holla.